All right, guys, so quick tips on patellar tendonitis, tendinopathy, so that pain right below your kneecap, AKA jumper's knee. So, of course, we recommend getting checked out by a doctor, a physical therapist, because your symptoms might be coming about because of mechanical issues. You need an assessment to find out what's going wrong. Now, a lot of times it is just overuse. So the forces that you expose that tendon to were beyond that tendon's capacity. So let me just give you some quick advice on what we do for our players that really works well for them, but definitely see a physical therapist and get assessed yourself. So let's say that you start playing basketball or you get into a vertical jump program and all of a sudden you start getting these symptoms. Well, we know that you got in too fast. We had too big of a spike in load. So we can handle a lot of load. We can handle basketball and strength and plyometrics, but it has to be progressively overload. So when we go from low level work or no work to all of a sudden we're on a vertical program and we get a big spike, that's when that patellar tendonitis can really kick in. Or you go from strength training all of a sudden into a plyo phase, you get a big spike. And so you've got to progressively overload. So for a lot of you guys, it makes the most sense to start at like 1 or 2 sets, see how your tendons respond before going up to a 3rd or a 4th set. So the key is knowing yourself and knowing that you cannot have a big spike in load very rapidly. Now, if you've already started having those symptoms, we need to remove that activity. So don't go back and do the same workout. I want you to take 2 to 3 days off completely, rest, ice, elevate, eat the right way. Good nutrition can go a long way here. Now, we got to get back into training the tendon, otherwise that capacity drops. So now anything that you do is going to start to flare up the tendon. We got to get that capacity as high as we can. So start off with our isometric phase. So I like to do you could either do a knee extension. So if you have a knee extension machine, you can do that. Or I like to do Spanish squats. So put the band right behind the knee so that we can really sit back and we can get down. If possible, thighs parallel to the floor. Now, if you feel pain at that low angle, then just go a little bit less and hold at that angle. So anywhere from 4 to 5 sets at 30 to 45 seconds. So if you can handle 45 seconds at 5 sets, that's good. Now keep in mind that isometric phase is absolutely necessary when our pain is above 5 out of 10. So if that patellar tendon is hurting at a pain scale of 5 out of 10 or above, we don't want dynamic movements. We don't want squatting. We don't want jumping. We want isometric, so isometric holds. So sit in that Spanish squat for 4 or 5 sets for 30 to 45 seconds, all right? Now, if that's easy, then the next session we can add load. So we can start to add a dumbbell in that goblet squat position. Now, you have to check yourself 24 hours after the session because it does have an analgesic effect, which basically means that the isometrics make the tendon feel better. So it can give you a little false sense of hope that all of a sudden your symptoms are improved. So you hit your isometrics 24 hours after that session. Did we elevate? So if you started the session at 5 out of 10 and then tomorrow, 24 hours later, all of a sudden you're a 6 out of 10, you went too hard. You need to cut down the sets or cut down the total rep time. Now, if the next day we're the same, we're a 5 out of 10, or we're decreased, we're a 4 out of 10, great, let's keep going. Now, once you get to the point where you're in that 3 to 5 range, so you're, let's say, 3 out of 10 on the pain scale, now you still want to do your isometrics for 2 sets, and then you're going to do 3 to 4 sets of dynamics. So now I can do my Spanish squats, and I can do my isometric hold, same thing, 2 sets, 45 seconds. Now I get that analgesic effect, I'm feeling good. Now I'm gonna go into slow, heavy Spanish squats. So now, heavy dumbbell, 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up. Everything is slow and controlled. 10 to 15 reps here. So now we're in that phase where we're starting to add that dynamic movement, but it's still slow and heavy. So after that Spanish squat where we're slow and heavy, now you want to start to add a single leg. So now that's a good progression, is to go to a rear foot elevated split squat. So session 1 you could start with your ankle right underneath your knee, right? So then your shin is pretty parallel at that bottom position. And then the next session, we can just creep that foot back a little bit, so now my knee is over the midfoot. Now I can creep it a little bit further back so that my knee is right over the toe. And then the next session, creep it even further back so that your knee is beyond your toe. And now we're starting to strengthen in actual sport-specific positions. And of course, you have to monitor. So if that first day of the rear foot elevated with our ankle under our knee flared up the tendon, well, hey, we went too far too fast, right? We don't want to progressively overload by bringing that foot back and applying more stress on the knee. So you really got to be able to pay attention to your body and monitor where you're at 24 hours after the exercise session. Now, once you get to about a 3 out of 10 or less, now we can start to add in a little bit more plyometrics, low level hopping, low level jump rope, single leg hops forward and backward, low level stuff where we start to expose the tendon to spring forces, because spring forces is usually what causes patellar tendonitis in the first place. Now we want to gradually ramp up on the plyometrics, so now we can start doing repeated jumps, repeated hops, maybe some low level bounding once we can handle it. And remember, you got to listen to your body. 24 hours after, are we elevating or are we staying the same or decreasing? If we can handle 3 solid plyometric sessions in a row, then I think it's time to return to the court. But until that point, I don't think that you should be really playing basketball. If you want to get some light shots, work on stationary handles, I think you should, because we got to maintain our skill. But if that patellar tendonitis is bad, I think we should remove ourselves from the court while we rehab that tendon. Now you might be wondering, how long do I stay in each phase? So remember, we got our isometric phase, we got our isotonic phase, so that's our normal slow heavy squats. Then we move to our single leg strength training phase, and then we get into our low level plyometrics, and we gradually ramp up the plyometrics and make it a little bit more intense each session. So those are our phases. How long do you stay in each one? You really can't answer that. So for some people, when that pain is above 5 out of 10, you stay in isometrics. That could be a week, that could be 2 weeks, that could be a month, I don't know. Typically for our guys, if they have a slight flare up in the patellar tendon, 1 week of isometrics is gonna be fine, and then we can move them into phase 2. Okay, so slow heavy Spanish squat is great when that pain is a 3 to 5, right? So if I'm 4 out of 10, then I need to stay in that phase. So now, once you're below a 5 out of 10, we can move into our slow heavy Spanish squat. All right, so we gotta be between a 3 and a 5 on our pain scale. Slow heavy Spanish squat. Now, as long as we can stay there or improve, then we're kind of in that right zone. If it increases, drop that and go back to your isometrics. But as long as we're between 3 out of 5, we're good. Let's say we spend 1 week there and we're like, look, I'm getting stronger, I feel good. Then that next week, so this would be our 3rd week, let's go to that rear foot elevated position. Day 1, we're doing that foot far out, so the ankle underneath the knee, and then each day we progress as long as we're not elevating above 3 out of 5. Now, let's say we spend 1 week there. Now we're like, hey, our tendon is less than 3. So let's say we're a 2 out of 10 or we're a 3 out of 10. Now we could probably move into that low level hopping, low level skipping, light bounds where you're going like 25% of your max distance, progressively overloading our ground contacts per day. Now, let's say I do a week and I look at it, I go, hey, I got 3 good sessions in a row of plyometrics where my patellar tendon did not flare up. I stayed below a 3 out of 10. Now we could start to get back into our sport. So now let's say, okay, I'm below a 3 out of 10. I handled 3 good sessions in a row. I'm feeling good. Now we can get back into our sport. All right, and now we can start to get back into our normal training. But when we get back into our normal training, we have to slowly get back into it. I don't want you to go back and find a vert code workout and say, okay, I'm just gonna do it as is. Literally start at 1 to 2 sets on everything and then gradually go up as long as that pain is not increasing. But we gotta gradually increase so that we don't get that same spike. Because even though you rehab the tendon and you strengthened up the tendon, if you go back and you get a big spike in volume, you're just gonna get the same symptoms over and over and over again. So you really can't answer this. For a lot of our guys, it's gonna be 1 week in each phase, so that's a 4-week process. For some of you, you might be in the isometric phase for a month. You might be in that dynamic phase for longer. Like, there's no way to tell. You gotta listen to your body and you gotta go off of your pain scale. Now, no matter where you're at in your prehab or rehab process, whether we're just trying to keep the patellar tendon healthy so that we don't get injured, or you're rehabbing it, we want to take the advice of Dr. Keith Barr and the research from UC Davis. So 15 grams of gelatin along with 50 milligrams of vitamin C 1 hour before exercise can significantly improve the collagen in the tendon. So it's really going to help get that tendon nice and strong. So gelatin, check out the patellar tendonitis guide. We actually have a recipe for what you want to do to make gelatin. This is very cheap and easy. There's also supplements that you can find online, gelatin supplements. Some would say that collagen supplements work just as well. Bone broth might work just as well. The reason that I'm focusing on gelatin is just because in this study it showed such great results, and I've seen at least 3 other studies that showed great results with gelatin as well. In the future, it might come out that protein is just as beneficial, but for now, I would say the research suggests gelatin and vitamin C 1 hour before exercise is the best. So 1 hour before our exercise session, we have our gelatin and our vitamin C. Now, we have a tendon session. The other thing that Dr. Keith Barr's research is showing is that longer sessions are not great for the tendons. So 5 to 10 minute training sessions are the best for the tendons. So I would do my gelatin, vitamin C, 1 hour later, I would do my, let's say, Spanish squat isometric holds, right? Or some low-level rope skipping, wherever we are in our rehab process. So get your 10-minute session. 6 hours later, let's go back and do our full workout. So then you go back and do your typical 30-minute to an hour workout. Or if you're not ready in your rehab process to do like a normal vert code workout, then you would just do 2 tendon training sessions per day. So you would go session in the morning, it has to be separated by 6 hours. So 6 to 8 hours later, I go back, I do a tendon training session in the evening. Now, even though you're focusing on, let's say, patellar tendonitis, we're doing our isometrics for that patellar tendon 2 times a day. Outside of that, you still want to be training your hips. So you still got to do your RDLs, you still want to do like your hip bridge variations, your single leg balance stuff, because we do want to strengthen up the hips, the glute medius and the glute max, because it can help take load off of that patellar tendon by getting the hips stronger. So make sure you're not completely stopping the training. We just want to work around that injury. All right. But as for the tendon itself, I think you should be exposing it to 2 sessions per day, probably 3 days per week. Now, some of you will be able to handle maybe 5 or 6 days per week, but I think you should really start at 3 days per week of those 2 training sessions, and then gradually ramp it up. If you don't feel pain the next day, 24 hours later, then maybe you can add another one. And just listen to your body. As long as your pain scale is staying the same or going down, I think that loading it more frequently is probably a good thing usually. So one more thing, you don't have to go crazy with the vitamin C. Like, you don't need a full pack of Emergency. They're suggesting 50 milligrams, so that could be like an orange has that, a glass of orange juice has that. Plenty of fruits have over 50 milligrams of vitamin C. So if you go a little bit over, that's not going to be a bad thing. It's not toxic. You're probably just going to pee it out. So it's okay if you have a little bit more, but don't think that when I say vitamin C, I'm saying like you need to go pound a full Emergency. That's just unnecessary, and that could be an expensive habit to get into. Now, don't think that this only applies for rehab. We're doing this for our NBA players just to keep them healthy. So typically we'll have their normal workout in the morning, similar to like a vert code format. They get their hour 15, just working on their body, explosiveness, full body strength. And then they come in later in the evening for their shooting session. So basically they'd get their hard strength session, they would go out on the court, they'd get their skill session, take 6 hours off, and then they would come back late afternoon or evening First thing they would do is they would take their gelatin, their vitamin C, they would have a tendon training session in the weight room. So they would get like their isometric holds or slow, heavy strength training specifically for the patellar tendon. Or if they've experienced Achilles tendonitis, then we'll do some calf raise holds, or we'll do calf raise holds and then get into some light jump roping, load the tendons, and then they go into their shooting session, right? So it's harder workout in the morning, and then 6 hours off, 5 to 10 minute training session after the vitamin C and gelatin, and then they go on the court and get their shots. So start to think about tendon training session as short bursts of exercise separated by 6 hours. That's going to give